Imagine you are setting up a new smartphone. You download an app, and a terms of service agreement pops up on your screen.
Oh, right, the classic wall of text that nobody actually reads.
Exactly. You likely scroll past hundreds of pages of dense legal jargon and just tap agree without a second thought. And by doing that, you essentially just gave a corporation legal permission to track your physical location, monitor your habits, map your social networks, and, analyze your behavior.
Yeah, it's just part of the routine now. We don't even blink.
Right. But now imagine a scenario where that same pop-up didn't just ask to track your data. Imagine it asked for the legal right to completely wipe your memories, chemically alter your personality, and, rewrite your core identity from scratch.
I mean, today we would call that a terrifying dystopian nightmare. People would lose their minds.
Completely. But in the 1950s, the intelligence community didn't even bother putting a terms of service in front of people. They didn't ask for a signature. They simply did it in the dark.
It really is a staggering historical reality, and it's one that often gets buried under pop culture. I mean, we have spent decades treating mind control like a comic book trope or, a cinematic spy gadget.
Yeah, the whole tinfoil hat stereotype.
Exactly, which makes it remarkably easy to forget the deeply unsettling, fully documented historical record sitting right underneath it all.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are welcoming you into a really complex exploration of how institutions attempt to map and manipulate the human mind. Our source material today comes from excerpts of a broadcast by the YouTube channel Akashic Echoes.
They do incredible work, by the way, very thorough.
They really do. They're a platform known for investigating the hidden, highly obscured corners of human history. So our goal today is to peel back those Hollywood layers, ignore the cinematic myths, and look at the actual verified attempts to weaponize human consciousness.
Because the reality is so much more intense than the movies.
It really is. We're going to examine the mechanics of how it was attempted, the sheer panic that drove it, and most importantly, what that dark legacy means for you navigating the digital world right now. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with a name that casts the longest shadow over this entire subject: MK Ultra.
Right. So officially, the bureaucratic stamp on MKUltra labeled it as a Cold War-era program designed to, quote, explore mind control.
Explore mind control. It sounds so harmless when you put it like that.
Doesn't it? The language the CIA used was incredibly sanitized. It sounds almost like an academic pursuit, like a benign psychological study you might find at a university campus.
Yeah, exploring mind control makes it sound like they were, I don't know, handing out clipboards and surveys.
Right.
But the source material drills down into the unofficial ambition of the program, and it was asking a significantly darker, much more profound question.
Oh, definitely. The core objective was not merely to observe or nudge human behavior. They were actively trying to figure out if human consciousness could be entirely broken down to its raw biological components.
And then artificially rewritten,
Yeah.
just totally rebuilt from the ground up.
Exactly. We have to look at the mechanics of what breaking down consciousness actually entails. Because you don't just ask a person to fundamentally change who they are. The institution operated under the theory that to program new behaviors into a human being, they first had to completely erase the existing psychological architecture.
They actually had a term for this, right? Depatterning.
Depatterning, yes, that was the phrase they used.
It is exactly like wiping a computer's hard drive completely clean before you attempt to install a new operating system. You have to destroy the old data first. And the tools they used to perform that human hard drive wipe were unbelievably extreme.
Oh, extreme is almost an understatement. The source outlines the use of severe sensory deprivation, intense psychological conditioning, and heavy, repeated doses of psychoactive substances.
Mostly LSD, right?
Yes, most notably LSD. And the underlying logic behind using something like LSD wasn't recreational. It was entirely tactical.
Tactical how? Like a weapon.
Basically, yes. The theory was that flooding the brain with intense hallucinogens could shatter a subject's psychological defenses and completely unmoor them from reality. So if you place a human being in total isolation, I mean stripping away all light, all sound, literally all sensory input for days, and then introduce a massive dose of psychoactive chemicals, the mind desperately searches for an anchor.
Because it's panicking, right? Trying to find any sense of normalcy.
Exactly, it panics. And the interrogator, or the scientist, steps into that void to become the new anchor.
Wow. So they become the new reality. They were effectively rewriting the rules of the subject's universe right then and there.
It is a brutal, violently invasive mechanism of control. And what is absolutely crucial here, and the source emphasizes this heavily, is who these subjects actually were.
Yeah, this is the part that is just so hard to stomach. We are not talking about informed volunteers signing liability waivers in a sterile laboratory setting.
Not at all. The subjects were overwhelmingly unwitting. We are talking about everyday civilians, hospital patients seeking treatment for minor physical ailments, inmates in the prison system.
Just incredibly vulnerable people.
Yes, and sometimes even their own intelligence personnel, people who had absolutely no idea they'd been drafted into a psychological war.
The broadcast summarizes the ethos of the program so coldly. They say consent was inconvenient to the objective.
It's chilling when you actually hear it out loud.
Right. Think about the twisted logic of that statement. If your ultimate goal is to dismantle human autonomy and turn a person into a programmable tool, asking for their permission inherently contradicts what you're trying to achieve. I mean, you cannot ask a person for permission to remove their free will.
You really can't. And to operate a program that systematically violates fundamental human rights on that kind of scale, well, it requires a very specific, highly engineered organizational architecture.
You can't just run this out of one building.
Exactly. MKUltra was not a single centralized facility. There was no giant underground laboratory where all the scientists gathered in a cafeteria to compare notes on sensory deprivation tanks.
No, it was compartmentalized to an extreme degree. I picture it like a massive, sprawling jigsaw puzzle, but one where the pieces were intentionally manufactured not to fit together.
That's a great way to describe it.
Like, a researcher at a prestigious university might receive funding to study the effects of sleep deprivation, right? And then a doctor at a clinic might be testing new chemical compounds. Neither of them knows about the other.
And neither of them realizes their individual isolated pieces of research are being funneled upward by the agency to build a comprehensive manual for psychological warfare.
Right. What's the point of structuring it like that?
Well, what's fascinating here is how that specific architectural choice, that extreme, deliberate fragmentation, serves a dual purpose for a massive institution. On one hand, it allows them to marshal vast resources to pursue this, godlike level of influence over the human mind. But on the other hand, it structurally insulates the entire organization from accountability.
Oh, so plausible deniability isn't just an afterthought. It is baked directly into the floor plan of the project.
Exactly. If no single person holds all the pieces of the puzzle, no single person can ever be blamed for the horrifying final picture.
The guilt is just diffused across dozens of isolated, disconnected nodes.
And that diffusion of responsibility allows a bureaucracy to behave with an utter lack of conscience. The researchers can tell themselves they are just conducting basic science, completely isolated from the terrifying cumulative effect of their collective work.
But that level of deliberate institutional blindness doesn't just happen by accident, There has to be a driving force powerful enough to make an entire intelligence apparatus decide to throw human rights and medical ethics completely out the window.
You don't take those steps lightly.
No, you don't. And the Akashed Echoes broadcast points to one overwhelming catalyst driving this entire machine: pure existential dread.
The Cold War era is almost always framed around the physical threat of a nuclear arms race. The historical focus is usually on the missiles and the bombers capable of wiping out whole cities.
Yeah, mutually assured destruction.
Right. But the source material emphasizes that there was a parallel arms race happening in the shadows, and the primary battlefield wasn't a map of Europe. It was the human brain.
Because the United States intelligence community operated under the terrifying assumption that its adversaries, specifically the Soviet Union and China, had already cracked the code on cognitive manipulation.
They saw reports of captured soldiers giving forced confessions that seemed just unnervingly genuine.
Right, the panic set in. The goal for MKUltra wasn't just parody. They didn't want to just catch up to this perceived Soviet brainwashing capability. They wanted to surpass it entirely and build something worse.
They were trying to manufacture what the source explicitly calls a programmed individual. This was the absolute holy grail of the entire initiative.
A programmed individual.
Yeah. They wanted to engineer an operative who could endure the most agonizing interrogation techniques known to man without breaking. Or, conversely, an assassin who could carry out a complex high-stakes mission and then have their memory of the event completely wiped.
basically functioning as a biological machine entirely without conscious awareness of their own actions. But wait, let me stop you there, because are we really supposed to believe that top-tier scientists and government officials genuinely thought they could build a real-life Manchurian candidate?
It sounds absurd now, but yes.
I mean, looking back at the basic understanding of neurology and biology available in the 1950s and 60s, was this pursuit based on actual viable science? Or was it just paranoid Cold War science fiction running totally out of control? Were they chasing a biological reality, or were they just blinded by their own panic?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the actual scientific viability of the project barely registered to the people holding the purse strings.
Or really, they just didn't care about the science?
When a nation is gripped by the fear of total annihilation, rationality is the first casualty. The mere belief that an adversary might possess a cognitive weapon is more than enough justification for a bureaucracy to try and build a more devastating one.
So the fear basically justified anything.
Exactly. That existential fear acted as a solvent, completely dissolving any pre-existing ethical frameworks. The mind ceased to be viewed as the sacred seat of individual identity and was reduced to a piece of strategic terrain. It was just another hill to be captured.
Okay, so you have essentially unlimited funding, driven by unchecked paranoid panic, slamming headfirst into the incredibly complex, stubborn reality of human neurology. They had to hit a wall eventually, right?
I had a massive wall.
What actually happens when you try to force a messy biological organism to behave like a programmable machine? This is where our source material is very careful to draw a hard line between documented historical fact and speculative internet fiction.
And it is vital to separate the two, especially with a topic so prone to sensationalism, because the verified documents unequivocally prove the unethical experiments happened.
Right.
The administration of LSD to unwitting subjects, the psychological torture techniques, the exploitation of vulnerable populations, that is all etched into the historical record and cannot be denied.
But the evidence for their ultimate goal, the fully operational, perfect, programmed individual who could carry out an assassination and forget it ever happened, that remains totally unproven.
Correct. There is no verified documentation showing they ever succeeded in building that perfect biological robot.
Which brings a massive historical event into sharp focus. The 1973 Purge.
Yes. In 1973, the Director of Central Intelligence ordered the comprehensive destruction of all files related to MKUltra.
Just wiped it all out.
A massive volume of data representing decades of research in human experimentation was intentionally incinerated. We only know what we know today because a small cache of financial records was accidentally stored in the wrong building and miraculously survived the purge.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's apply the source's logic to that massive document purge. If a major tech company is working on a new software product, and it is a total flop, like it barely works, the code is a mess, the beta testers hate it, they might quietly scrap the project and bury the press release.
Or they sweep it under the rug.
But if that same tech company is suddenly facing a massive federal antitrust audit and they intentionally delete their core source code the night before the government inspectors arrive, I mean, you only do that if the code proves you were doing something highly illegal and highly effective.
That's a very compelling analogy.
So, looking at 1973, did the CIA burn those records to hide the embarrassing incompetence of a failed 20-year science fair project? Or were they protecting a behavioral breakthrough they didn't want anyone else to understand?
This raises an important question. Did the pursuit of total mind control actually end when the paper turned to ash? Or did it simply shed its skin and evolve?
Because bureaucracies with endless budgets and decades of institutional momentum do not just throw up their hands and walk away from a problem.
Never. They rebrand.
Exactly. They take the data they managed to salvage, change the department name, shuffle the oversight committees, and refine the objective.
They realize that trying to wrestle an individual's consciousness into submission using sensory deprivation and hallucinogens is incredibly inefficient. It is messy, it leaves obvious physical evidence, and frankly, human beings have a frustrating tendency to fiercely resist direct coercion.
We tend to fight back when tied to a chair.
Right. The program didn't disappear, it absorbed the hard lesson that brute force is the wrong tool for the job.
The lesson they learned was about the mechanics of influence itself. The Akashic Echoes broadcast points out that the legacy of MKUltra isn't a secret trigger word that suddenly activates a sleeper agent.
No, it's nothing like that.
We aren't dealing with hidden switches flipping in a crowd to cause mass hysteria. The evolution moved from historical brute force to modern, scalable, invisible influence.
If you want to reliably control a person, you don't strap them to a chair in a dark room and force them to watch a screen. You make the screen so compelling, so perfectly tailored to their psychological needs, that they voluntarily strap themselves to it.
Wow.
The monumental shift was from attempting to control the individual directly to shaping the environment the individual inhabits.
Let's break down the how of that evolution. Because we see the direct DNA of those early behavioral experiments in modern algorithm design.
Oh, absolutely.
The tech platforms you use every single day, they don't need LSD to depattern your behavior. They use intermittent reinforcement. They use dopamine loops. You pull down to refresh your social media feed, and your brain gets a tiny chemical reward, unpredictable in its timing.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism a casino uses to keep a gambler sitting at a slot machine lever for 12 hours straight.
Right. The environment is meticulously designed to bypass the critical, conscious, rational part of the brain and appeal directly to the primal nervous system.
And when a platform algorithm prioritizes content that triggers outrage or deep anxiety or intense tribalism, it is artificially inducing a state of heightened emotional arousal.
Which psychology tells us makes you far more suggestible.
Exactly. In that state of high emotional arousal, you are vastly more likely to share a post, to click a link, to buy a product, or to alter your political opinion without conscious reflection.
So what does this all mean? If we look at the endless feeds we scroll through, the highly personalized content environments constantly constructed around us, have modern tech algorithms essentially achieved the exact goal MKUltra was desperately chasing?
It's a heavy thought.
Are they shaping human decisions at a global scale simply by paving the road we walk on, rather than forcefully grabbing the steering wheel out of our hands?
That is perhaps the most unsettling synthesis of all the source material we've covered. True power isn't about dominance.
Because people resist dominance.
Exactly. If you apply overt, visible force, people will inevitably push back. They recognize the coercion, their defenses go up, and they rebel. But if you design an environment so seamlessly, so perfectly tailored to a person's psychological profile, that they believe every choice they make is entirely their own independent decision.
That's the holy grail right there.
That is absolute influence. MKUltra, with all its violent, unethical floundering, ultimately proved that domination is a dead end. The most effective cage is the one the bird doesn't know it is inside.
You don't need sensory deprivation tanks if you can capture an entire population's attention with a glowing rectangle in their pocket.
And the consent that the CIA found so incredibly inconvenient in the 1960s.
We hand it over freely today. Every single time we tap accept on a user agreement to access a new platform, it fundamentally reframes everything we've pulled from the source material today.
It really changes how you look at your phone.
MKUltra was never just a Cold War relic gathering dust in an archive. It was a dark, transparent window into exactly how far institutions are willing to go to map, manipulate, and ultimately direct the human mind. The ambition started with a crude desire for robotic control, but it evolved to prove that scalable, subtle influence is infinitely more powerful than brute force.
It forces us to critically analyze the invisible architecture of our daily lives. The battle for the human mind never ended in 1973.
This just changed venues.
The tactics simply became so sophisticated, so seamlessly embedded in our digital routines that we stopped recognizing them as tactics altogether.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to take away today. We've traced this long evolution from crude, violent experiments in underground labs to the smooth, invisible algorithms shaping our digital reality right now. But what happens tomorrow?
That's the big question.
Think about the wearable technology we increasingly rely on. What happens when the devices you carry everywhere don't just track what you click, but begin reading your real-time biometric responses? Your resting heart rate, your pupil dilation, the microscopic shifts in your skin temperature and stress levels.
The data points are getting incredibly intimate.
If an algorithm can read your nervous system's raw data in real time and instantly adjust your digital environment to perfectly manipulate your mood, are we voluntarily strapping on the exact tools of subtle behavioral control that the CIA could only dream of building during the Cold War?
A chilling perspective to consider the next time you strap on a smartwatch.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, look closely at the system shaping your choices, and most importantly, keep questioning the world around you. We'll be back with another deep dive soon.